You've also lectured about, which I really enjoyed, about North America, and also helped teach me that there's a lot more complex societies going on here uh, for a long period of time. So maybe can we start at the beginning? Who were the early humans in North America?
Well, we go through that Paleo-Indian and Archaic period for thousands of years. As we started this conversation, probably, 30,000 years is a conservative now. Humans first enter the Americas. But the first cultures we get here are mound builders around the Mississippi and to the east, and then also a totally separate group in the what we call the American Southwest now, the Four Corners, who will develop into mostly the people we call the Pueblo people, who are still there today, like Zuni and Hopi people. So we've got these two clusters. The very first major community in North America is in the most unlikely place. It's in northern Louisiana. People think I'm crazy when I say this, but there is a pyramid in northern Louisiana, a big one at a site called Poverty Point that is 3,500 years old. So it's the same age as the pyramids in Egypt. And it is a giant thing just poking out of the bayous of Louisiana. And people don't believe me when I say it, but it's there.
The mound builders. What was that society like in comparison to everything else we've been talking about in Mesoamerica?
They evolved over thousands of years. We call them mound builders. This is something I, object to. I think we should have a better. We do the last version of them. We call them Mississippians now. But generally speaking, we call all these guys mound builders. But what they built were pyramids. They look like mounds now. And they didn't build them out of stone. That's kind of our just inherent Western bias. Something that's built out of stone is sophisticated, and something that's built out of dirt is rudimentary. But in their full living form, they did have cores of dirt, but then they also had kind of clay caps. So they had terraces, they had whole complexes of buildings up on top. There were kings that lived up there. There's the biggest of the Mississippian cities is called Cahokia, and it's right outside of St. Louis. And it was huge. It had a population of 20,000 people and pyramids all over the place, a huge palisade wall around it. It was absolutely gigantic, a thriving metropolis. And we in America have kind of a collective amnesia. Like we never hear about these massive civilizations. Cahokia was the big first city, but then it spread from the Mississippi all the way to the Atlantic. There were hundreds and hundreds of these big cities that had, 5,000 to 10,000 people each.
Were they their own thing, or was there some kind of thread connecting all of them?
They had a unified religion and culture. They were, again, not an empire. So there were warring city-states. There were kind of territories that were owned by big kings, and then the cities around them were kind of the subsidiary lords and kings. Mm-hmm. And then one kingdom could either ally with a neighbor or have a fight. Mm-hmm. So they were kind of countries, I think, we could safely say there were different countries within this patchwork that was Eastern United States. And it's so weird that we don't know this, because it was clearly documented by the Spanish. I'm not talking about just archaeology. We find them in archaeology now, but Hernando de Soto landed in Florida and went for 3 years he went up into the Carolinas and over down into Alabama and Louisiana, and he's the first one to see the Mississippi up there. But for 3 years, he went through city after city after city, unfortunately decimating them, eating all their corn, giving them diseases. But, the documentation's clearly there. He met collectively millions of people in a very sophisticated and uniform civilization.
So it was disease, and stealing of resources, but was there like explicit murdering going on?
Unfortunately, yeah. He was a murderer and a psycho and a liar. He 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 snowed them that he was some kind of deity. Actually learned a trick from the Inca who he was with Pizarro in his first run and went back to Spain, was rich, had a wife, a castle. Then he got bored and he decided to have a reign of terror on Northern America for 3 years. But he had people burned at the stake. He had his dogs rip them apart. He was very, very brutal. He ruled that area through fear and had absolutely no respect for anybody. He made promises and broke them all the time. He was a brutal man.
So this whole period when Christopher Columbus came, how did that change everything?
Well, there's a great anthropological body of literature. It's called the Columbian Exchange, based on Columbus, but it's all this trade back and forth between the New World and the Old World, and the Old World got just wonderful stuff. All of a sudden, their diet didn't suck. All these vegetables came in. The New World got herd animals. It got pigs and cows and goats that it didn't have, but it also got 13 infectious diseases. Europe had wave after wave and kind of had herd immunity on a lot of things, but it didn't actually go away. It just couldn't spread like a wildfire through the community. So when they arrived to the Americas, all of a sudden, a pile of horrible diseases hit people. I think in the first 20, 30 years, there were people who had contracted multiple deadly diseases at once and died of them. But the numbers, it's a shameful part of history, and it wasn't something that Europe perpetrated on them. The medical science at that time was still the four humors theory, that people were made of yellow bile, black bile, blood, and phlegm. And we did things like, well, you've got to bleed him. He'll feel better then. So we had no idea what an infectious disease was. But the reality was that this horde of diseases hit everyone. And the numbers are now saying in the first 50 years that 90% of everybody was dead. And that the number of people has increased as well. As far as our estimates, we're thinking it's somewhere around 150 million people. And 90% of them died. And with them, all their knowledge. Imagine the moment where, who dies when things get bad? It's the young and the old. So all the knowledge keepers die suddenly. The children die. This next generation that's half taught and now completely demoralized, thinking that this is a spiritual attack, that their gods hate them, that the only way out of it is to accept this new Christianity. But they don't want to bring kids into this world where everybody's dying. And even if they do, they can't teach them what the old people were going to teach them, because the old people are gone and didn't finish the transmission. So in a single terrible moment in human history, the generation loses all their knowledge. So a lot of the things that these people knew just blipped out.
But with that also just the wisdom of the entire civilizations.
So much of what they knew was just lost at that moment. We have the Maya who had those hieroglyphs, and that we've learned a lot from that.
Yeah, but not a significant integration of that wisdom into. So it wasn't when the Europeans came, it wasn't like the cultures were integrated. It was a story of domination. Of erasure, essentially.
In North America, there's a new term in the literature that I like. We call it the Mississippian Shatter Zone. That Mississippian civilization was millions of people, but they got spread out all over the place over the next centuries. And now we have this shatter zone where we have ruins, and the people that were actually from those ruins are somewhere else on a reservation far away. And I'm just about to talk to a Cherokee man who listened to some of the things I had to say and says, all those ho-chunk things you were saying from that ho-chunk culture, my grandparents talk about this sort of thing too. Can I talk to you by phone and tell you about these things? So we've got this shatter zone where, we're going to try to put the puzzle back together, especially in terms of Mississippian religion. I really think we're making headway in this generation, and it's exciting to be part of piecing this old religion and its mythology back together.
Just as since a lot of people kind of refer to Christopher Columbus as the person who discovered America, I read that the Vikings reached North America much earlier in 1000 CE. And why do you think they didn't expand and colonize?
Because they got their ass kicked.
Okay, simple.
It's the truth.
Yeah.
It is absolutely true that the Vikings were here. There's a great site in Nova Scotia called Lanceau Meadows, which definitely has what's left of a Viking colony. It was Leif Erikson and his father, Eric the Red, who they got kind of kicked out of Europe because they apparently couldn't stop murdering people. And so they went to Greenland and then kind of island hopped over to Canada. But I think the culture that was in that area was named the Dorset. But they would have nothing to do with the Vikings. They attacked the Viking settlement every day and did not give them an inch until they decided it was just worthless and they left it. The Vikings attacked Ireland and they just found a bunch of, monasteries full of gold with a bunch of guys going, "We're men of God, we don't fight." And the Vikings were like, "This is great. That's great. This will be easy then. We'll just loot all these Easter eggs." But the Native Americans in Canada were like, not having it. They kicked their ass. In fact, Leif Erikson's brother, Thor, died there. The natives killed him. He was supposed to be in charge of expanding the settlement, but they just killed him.
So a lot of the Native American cultures were also, they're sophisticated warring cultures also.
Yes, they fought, especially the Mississippians. Boy, they were tough. And so were, the Five Nations, the Mohawk, the Huron. The ones that kicked the Vikings' ass up there, they were probably Algonquin speakers. But they were connected, just above the Great Lakes. But they were all a very tough people.
When you think about the Spaniards and the Portuguese and the over 100 million people that were killed, do you see that as a tragedy of history, or is it just the way of history?
I think that the epidemics, I consider it a tragedy. That did not have to happen. And that was not a fair fight. Nobody knew what to do about it. There was just a tragic, perfect storm of events. It was not, I think that the Spanish and the Portuguese get unfairly maligned in what's been called the Black Legend, that they just marched into America and murdered everyone. That's not the fact. It was the diseases that murdered everyone. In fact, there was a really poignant story I read of a Spanish priest in the Amazon, in the Brazilian northern part of the Amazon, where he made this utopian community, and he was bringing people in that were getting sick. And he wrote, "I'm baptizing everyone. I baptize 10,000 people a day, and yet God's still killing them. Why is he doing this to them? They're doing everything that I ask them to do. They are submitting to the will of God. But this guy doesn't realize that the same bowl of holy water that he's baptizing them in, he's just wiping the disease on everybody's faces. He's accelerating it when he doesn't even realize. He thinks he's saving them, but he's actually killing them."
Yeah.
That's a tragedy. That's not just like spoils go to the victor stuff. That's just straight up tragedy.
Yeah. Yeah, but that one is even hard to know what to do with, like Black Death. Infections, they don't operate on normal human terms, right? They just
Nope.
go through entire populations.